Good morning. Um, how to describe what it is to be a library futurist? I have the very great pleasure in my work of watching what's going on and trying to think about how and when that's going to affect libraries. I am not a psychic. I cannot predict the winner of a horse race 2 years from now. But I am a trend watcher, and I spend a lot of time watching how trends migrate out of the general universe and into library practice. Because the people who have research and development money get things before we do. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is not earth-shattering news that you've never heard about before, so much as this is what's going on, and here's how libraries are responding to that and what that implies for us moving forward. I'll say at the top of this that your mileage may vary and that everything I say today may or may not apply to you. Some of the things I talk about today, I know for a fact you're already doing, and it won't be news in that way, but perhaps it'll be, clumped together with some other things as a trend or some context. You'll see maybe how that fits in with other things that are going on, okay? So if you came to this morning expecting me to talk about something I am tracking that's way out there, like the potential for using bacteria as a data storage medium. We could talk about that afterwards, but I'm not going to be at that kind of futuring while we're here. Fair enough. This is going to be much more applied, a little closer in, and more a matter of something Alan Kay once said, which is point of view is worth 80 IQ points. I'm going to talk about how I'm looking at the trends and how they add up as much as saying, oh, here's this new cool thing you never heard of. That's not the bright, shiny objects conversation. I hope that's okay with you. If it is, bob your heads up and down because I like feedback. Good, okay. I've been doing library things for a long, long time. I had my very first library job in 1964. As a junior, some of you weren't born yet. I was a junior page at a public library in Santa Clara, California, and I have been doing some kind of library stuff ever since. I've had some kind of paid library work since 1964. And over the course of that, I've done a lot of different library jobs, and the whole practice has changed. When I came in, a young person who was working in the library was supposed to keep their head down, speak when they were spoken to. Every library I ever worked in at that age was run by these great old battle axe broads who knew everything and knew everyone and kind of ruled with an iron fist, and you were very humble when you came into the presence, and we worshiped them. And the deal was, the longer you stayed, the more you knew, the smarter you got, the more of a master of your craft you were. And ultimately, if you put in your time and paid attention, you would be the diva or divo, and people would kiss your ring, and you would rule the universe. And that was the deal when I started out. And right about the time I got out of library school in the 70s, the whole deal changed because all of the automation and technology trends started to move out of the mainstream into the library universe. And you would go home on Friday being smart, and you would come back on Monday, and you would be stupid again. And suddenly it was the whippersnappers who were ruling the world, and we were playing catch-up all the time. And I spent a lot of time on the technology side of this industry, following those trends, working in those tasks, until I realized that what was easier to foresee was human nature, which doesn't change to make quarterly earnings reports look good. And I moved my practice and my interest and my focus over to human factors. Now, when you talk about human factors, it's not as whiz-bang as the bright, shiny objects, that are released every Christmas, but it has a lot more to do with what's happening in our work. So that's the second piece of disclosure today. I'm going to work a little closer in, and I'm probably going to talk about the human side as much or more as about the stuff. Fair enough? Bob your heads again. We're good. Okay, to launch. I have twin granddaughters. They just turned 16 this past weekend. We're well into the cars and boys years, which is one of my favorite times for them. But their world experience has been substantially different than mine. And I want to point out a few things. For their entire life, music has been downloadable. That is how you get music. Since they've been born, music has been downloadable. Since they were born, women have flown fighter jets for the US military. This has never been what they thought about when you say Amazon. And this one, I just realized not too long ago, they use these symbols every day. They do not use the things that are in the pictures. They have never seen a floppy disk that looked like that, ever. Telephones, no, that is not a phone from their whole life. Phones haven't looked like that. And that envelope thing might be a birthday card, but not much else. For them, these are abstractions. For me, that's my life. That's real. That's normal. But even the technology that's pictured here is totally an idea to them and not a thing. They know that to watch TV, you don't need a TV. If they want to ask somebody for directions, this is who they ask. Okay, one of my favorites. For their entire life, this has always been good for you. And here's this one, I have to take a deep breath here. For their entire life, since before they were born, Kurt Cobain, the Commodore 64, and JFK Jr. have always been dead. This is a different world experience, and this is who's coming our way, and that's part of the trend that we're accommodating, is the set of what's normal for the people we're working with. Okay, you knew all that stuff, so what? Why do I point this out? Why is that even worth mentioning? That's worth mentioning because in library practice, as in everything else, some of what we do has a use-by date. And if you're the person who's been using it for a long time, you're not always as aware of that date as the people who are coming to it new, who confront it and say, that is just so weird. Why do you do this? Why don't you do that? One of my nieces graduated, it's been some years ago now, from UCLA. I went to her graduation, and there was this sea of people. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people all over this college campus, families, graduates, an enormous university. And here are everybody, all the boomers, my age people, saying, okay, now when you get out of the gymnasium, honey, we're going to be, see that tree with the weird top? We'll be over there. And she looked at me and said, dudes, I'll call you. Right. What we think is normal isn't normal. We're just used to it. And perceptions on our part and on the community's part, except for these young'uns who are coming up, tend to lag the reality of what's really going on. One of the great reinventions that's happened in my lifetime is firefighters. When I was a kid, you know what firefighters did for a living? They fought fires. They wore funny hats and they carried hoses around. What do they do for a living now? Search and rescue, first responders, the EMTs, a lot of fire department work is no longer anything to do with fires, because changes in technology, changes in building codes, changes in materials, changes in lifestyle. We just don't have as many burning buildings as we used to. We need that resource for that emergency. But day to day, the majority of their work has moved into another area. I think that's an exact analogy to what's happening in libraries. We used to spend so much of our time petting the inventory, cataloging it ourselves, managing, shelving, and there's still a lot to do with print materials. But the content and the care and curation of the object has become a smaller and smaller percentage of what we do, and we've expanded into all these other areas, into literacy, into content creation. Publishing and imprints have moved into the libraries. We're doing work of a community sort. We're doing activities in theaters. Benjamin Franklin was involved in early foundation of both fire departments and libraries in this country. And people still think that the modern day library and the modern day fire department are a lot like they were when Ben Franklin was working on them. In both disciplines, the technologies have changed so substantially, and people's lifestyles have changed so substantially. The business we're in is only partly recognizable to somebody from that era. But the nostalgic cartoon clip art image, this is the fireman, and it's a little library lady stamping the book, right? Everybody, if you Google image librarian, you get people shelving and stamping. When they open a new library facility in a major research university, they still take a picture of the head librarian shelving. Right? Because in the popular imagination, there's this nostalgia for the way it used to be, even though this has nothing to do with the majority of what the work is, and frankly doesn't have a lot to do with the majority of what people's consumption expectations are. They wax nostalgic about the little library on the corner from their childhood. So we could walk to the library, through the snow, both ways uphill, right? Even though that's gone the way of the corner grocery store. And the one lady who ran it, a spinster with a bun, doesn't exist either. So we've got two opposing forces. We've got the changes in modern society where people say, that's not even normal what you do. And concurrent with that, their expectation that what we do is this old nostalgic thing because they haven't updated that piece. They've updated every other part of their life, but not their impression of what libraries are like. And I use the fire example just to show you, they do that to everybody. It's not just us, right? Have you been in a party where you were talking with a perfectly interesting looking stranger about what was going on in your life, and they asked what you did for a living, and you said, I do something related to the library, and suddenly the conversation changed? They apologized for some little remark they made earlier. Oh, I would have never said that word if I'd known you were like a prude. Or they look at you and you're less than 1,000,000 years old and you have a good haircut and cute shoes, and they go, nah, you don't, nah. Or you're a guy, what's up with that? There are no guys in libraries. This is what they're doing. Okay, is that their problem? Nah, they do it to everybody. And it's not an insult. It's just nostalgia taking the place of actual research. And that's okay, but when you're futuring, remember that to move us along, we move from where we know we are, and to move everybody else along, we move them along from this. So when I talk with civilians, when I talk with community groups doing planning, when I talk even with students coming to university, their imaginations start here, and we need to be aware of that gap. There are some emerging roles for libraries that I think are excellent positioning for us, and these pertain primarily to public libraries, though I'm seeing them infiltrating other styles of library as well. Things that it is worth emphasizing primarily to help people understand what we do and to understand how we ought to present it as we do the work. One is the whole notion of a reading spa. There's a lot of word on the street that, well, if all content moves online, then why do you need a library? I will point out to you that in every type of library I know, people come there to read even if they bring their own content and even if they bring it in electronic format. You go to any university, people could do that studying with those resources in their dorm or their college union or wherever else, and they don't do that. They come to the library. Something about that ambiance, something about the other people there for the same purpose, and the lack of distraction. I hear lots of people tell me that when they're at home, they can't quote, This drives me nuts. They cannot just sit around and read. That's like a guilty pleasure now. Years ago, reading was not optional. You had to read to get information. You had to read to get through your day. There were fewer alternatives for consuming content. Now reading is an elective. Fortunately, it's a strong elective. People do it. But they feel like it's a treat. And they feel when they're at home having that treat, maybe they should be engaging with their family, or maybe they should be folding the laundry. Or if they're at college, maybe they should be washing the dishes or talking to their roommates or something else. And in order to be okay doing this reading or studying activity, they go to an officially reading and studying zone, which is the library. And they go there not as a duty, but as a treat. It's a little spa for the mind. And if we understand that people come for the activity and not just the content, we're moving a long way towards what a library looks like in the coming years. We will support your habit. We will make it a pleasurable experience. We will make it clear that we think you're doing a good thing when you do this. And we will set up our spaces to accommodate it in a comfortable way. I don't know if you can see, but this girl is sitting in a very hard chair that was meant to be more like a study chair, and even then was kind of unforgiving. When you read at home, do you sit in the hardest possible chair? No. You put your feet up, maybe you have a nice reading lamp, you have a view to the outside. You know what it takes to nest in and read for a while? Supporting that activity is something I think we need to do more of. And not worry so much about where the content came from. Just make it possible for people to come and read in public and in community. There is something different about doing it under those circumstances. And serendipitously, if we just happen to put some really great content around, people will trip over it. But we have to understand ourselves as a destination aside from our content. We are no longer just the grocery store where you grab the stuff off the shelves and beat it. We are the kitchen where you stay and make something. And part of what you make is a reading experience or a study experience. Sometimes you don't do that alone. Part of what people are looking for is the space to do that in community, and that means conversation. And that changes your furniture, it changes your zoning in the library, it changes a whole lot of stuff. Who's in a library so small that you can't just say, oh, quiet people in this room, loud people in that room? Yeah, okay. The best zoning that's happening under those circumstances is by hours of the day. So you set a time that's a quiet time. It's like adult lap swim at the rec center. No, I'm serious about this. And you say, look, if you're in a public library and you want a quiet experience, you do not come at 3:30. You just don't. But if you have a clientele that wants a quiet experience and not with a lot of conversation around them, you say, okay, from these hours to these hours, we have quiet. And that's our policy. And then during the other hours, it's the Wild West out here, so just pick your time. That tends to work if you can't zone by space. We're also seeing libraries that are workshops, again, not just the grocery store, the kitchen, where you're going to make stuff. And maker space is a very hot trend right now. I think the most important piece of that is the kinetic learning piece, not the fact that you're putting gadgets together. And one of the things libraries need to do if we're going to really be viable into the future is to do a better job of understanding different learning styles and creating environments and programming and content for people whose learning style is not sit quietly and read a book. I tried for years to bake bread by reading cookbooks. And my bread was horrible. It was doorstop horrible. And I did all the things you were supposed to do, and I looked at the pictures, and I used the thermometer to get the water the right temperature and all that, and it still just wasn't happening for me until I stood next to somebody who was a very good baker, and we did it together, and she said, you feel that? It's supposed to feel like that. Oh, okay. And it took that style of learning. I've known people who are extremely challenged, dyslexic, have other learning disabilities, who are extraordinarily effective kinetic learners. And we need to get over ourselves that we're tied by print and be in the we make you smart business rather than the we help you learn things from books business. I have a public library client who is very proud of their homework help program. And I said something about math, and she said, oh, no, we don't do math. I said, excuse me? And she said, well, we don't have anybody here who's comfortable with helping with math. And it's like, then you're not helping with homework. You're helping with language arts. It's different. Again, especially if you're not in a public library setting, if you're in a academic library or a school library setting, going to this may be a challenge. Nonetheless, if you start to think of shop as for more than just building stuff, but for a specific learning style that many people share, you start to understand that we can diversify. It's a natural fit for us and position ourselves in the free choice learning business rather than in the straight books business. Huge opportunities in new media, particularly digital media production. Some of them require investment. Some of them just require software on existing equipment. There's a tremendous thirst for this style of learning. I see that as a massively growing trend, and innovative libraries are doing some interesting licensing around that. Orange County, Florida has just opened an extremely large digital media production operation, a whole floor of their central library. In order to use all that stuff for free, you agree to make whatever you produce available on a Creative Commons license. So they're developing content. Some of the intellectual capital is staying in town and available to the other residents in exchange for offering fairly expensive, sophisticated tools to a clientele that might not otherwise have access to that. So if you're going to offer a recording studio, if you're going to offer an editing lab, if you're going to introduce people to app creation, tend to the licensing and say, you will invite you to your house, but now you're a sharecropper and you got to leave a little bit with us. Or a tither, I don't know exactly. A small percentage of what you create using our stuff needs to stay with us. There are very few open laboratories. Intellectual capital has a value, a market value now. And people pay to play, which means there are barriers to getting involved. And then they hang on to their stuff, which means there are barriers to propagation. The library is perfectly positioned to open access in both those directions. Can we make sure that everyone gets a shot just because they're creative, not because they're rich? And can we be sure that once something great and creative has been funded in a communal way, that some value from that is available to the community to build on for the next time? Very few productions in new media are 100% original. They all stand on the shoulders of other people's work. They all share ideas. They're all inspired by seeing other things. Film editors want to look at as much film as possible. Music people want to listen to as much music as possible. And making it possible for that barrier-free sharing is a tremendous way to increase everybody's potential. Speaking of commercial interest, positioning the library as a commercial anchor is a growing trend that is very successful for public libraries. I haven't seen, I have one community college project that may start to move into academic libraries as well, but in public libraries, this is really turning out to be a tremendous boon. This photograph was taken from the upstairs level of a public library in Southern California. It's the Rancho Cucamonga Victoria Gardens Library. And so one end of the street, the anchor store is Macy's, and at the other end of the street, the anchor store is the public library. Which one gets more visitors? The public library. And it's a two-trip business. You come to get your stuff, and then you come to bring your stuff back. Retail loves that. Anybody who's doing downtown redevelopment or positioning a branch library in a community, the image of it's a separate standalone building off in the middle of a park, pristine, little ivory tower. Think about this in terms of the vibrancy of the areas we serve, attracting people to a retail area and having hours and presentation that match that retail area. it can be a tremendous economic boom and has really led to some interesting redevelopment. And I'm talking about both urban settings, Washington, D.C. is certainly going in this direction, but also in suburban and more country settings where town is people's destination. And the last one on this list of sort of new roles that I think is worth mentioning to exploit, there are a whole lot of people my age and older now who are entering our forgetful years. Short-term memory is the first to go. And every study we see says if you exercise your brain, you retain some of that. You retain independence, you retain social connections. The library is a massive program for helping seniors stay engaged, connected, smart, independent, and able to live on their own without various kinds of assistance. What is the biggest growing market and simultaneously the biggest growing public investment in this country today by a huge amount? It's healthcare. We should have a piece of that. There is so much money in healthcare that pays back with a small investment. There is so much evidence that helping seniors exercise their brains before it's too late is a great investment for public service. There's so much concern about all the boomers coming on to years when they can't live on their own, and what the heck are we going to do? And trust me, all their kids are worried about this. If you've been looking for a grant opportunity lately, go here. Go here. If you can combine kinetic learning with that, there's probably twice as many people who are willing to fund it. But the idea that the library, not as a quote senior center, but that exercising your brain is as important for long-term health as exercising your body is now an accepted, just sort of nobody argues about that. And there are people putting money behind figuring out ways to make that happen in a sensible and affordable way. I think it's a huge grant opportunity, and it's, again, a way to see what we do in context. Why are we doing this program? Well, we think seniors would like it. No, we're doing this program to maintain their health. We ought to be packaging it that way. We ought to be supporting it that way. We ought to be pitching it that way. We ought to be funding it that way. Point of view is worth 80 IQ points. That's what's going to move you into the future. It's the human factor side of this. What gadgets you use to support this, whether you're buying luminosity or you're doing something else, don't matter as much as you understand that this is a good role for libraries. There are some new approaches to service that I think are growing, areas that are good future investments. If you're already in them, good for you. If you're not already in them, I'm telling you, these aren't fads, these have legs. The first one I'm going to talk about is what I would call hosted services, where the library is a place where other services meet the public. Zip cars, so if you're in an urban area, zip cars are now a growing area. Rental bicycles also, the urban bikes are an analogy to this. Having the library be a place where those things are stored is a tremendous boon to putting your library in line with people's expectations. If you're in a small town or rural area, hosting postal services, now that so many post offices are closing, it's another tremendous way to make your library a destination and to combine a compatible service with what you do. The nicest hosted services you don't run, you're just the landlord. And remember that. Saying we'll do this new service because nobody else will is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about really just providing the venue. You've all thought about this, embedding library people in other places. And it is hard if you work in a small library to get out of the house. I understand that. But if you are in a library that has the kind of staffing that people can actually get out, frequently what they do is what we would style outreach, which is let's go out and be a missionary and tell the library's story. Instead, I find that showing is working better than telling. Instead of going out and talking about the service, go out and deliver the service, and then people get what the deal is. The lowest hanging fruit in this area is children's services. And the most receptive audience are families who are waiting in line for something. You take a tiny bit of spontaneous children's programming and you go out and you busk the line. And then you offer people an opportunity to sign up for a library card. You will have the happiest parents on the block. So if people line up to sign up for school, if they line up to get into the home show, if they line up to go to a sporting event, and you can give 10 or 15 minutes worth of distraction to that family, trust me, they will know the value of your wares and they will follow you back to wherever you are to find out more and to be part of what the modern library is. If you are in an academic situation, this picture is taken at a community college, having someone at the college union or places where students gather, doing on-the-spot reference or quick assist with somebody who needs to hook to something else on campus, showing what you can do where people don't have to come to you to find it, more effective than any of the bibliographic instruction you could ever do. Okay? This is a way to give people a free sample. And once they taste it, they'll realize what you have to offer, and you'll realize what they're asking for, and you'll begin to serve a clientele beyond the cognoscenti who come in and use what you already have. One of the reasons libraries don't change is they've got a fixed clientele who like it the way it is. And they don't notice the people who aren't coming in because they don't connect to the way it isn't. Right? So this is another kind of market research. I think the whole notion of lecture-style missionary outreach has limited shelf life. And we ought to be looking at free samples and face-to-face market research. If I went to the mall and they said, taste these 4 mustards, which one do you like? I would give you my opinion, even if if I had to go to the grocery store to do that, it would be less likely that I would pause. You know what I'm saying? Find some place where people are a captive audience and might have a little time. Obviously, mobile services are huge. A little shout out to what Lexington's already doing. Anything we can put on a phone is all to the good. In studies, Pew and others, that look at digital divide between haves and have-nots and who's connected and who isn't, people who are crossing that divide and are becoming empowered are more likely to do that with a phone than with any kind of computer. So if we truly want to reach long-term the maximum number of people, we'll be able to deliver our services in this medium and not just in this one. And the QWERTY keyboard as the key to our interface is something we need to look hard at because touch interfaces are everywhere. Emergency room equipment in very high-tech hospitals now, touchscreen. Okay, we're talking high-end instrumentation, we're talking navigational devices, we're talking military. And it's not that it's post-literate, it's that it's faster and less prone to error. So all of us who type very carefully and spell well, the time is coming. So this style of operating system, this style of interface, and certainly the portability of it are the wave of the future. And not just as a teaser for what you can do if you come in the library and use the keyboard. A full-on substitute. Another thing that's affecting public libraries tremendously, and a style of service that I'm starting to see a little bit more of in academic libraries, but certainly public libraries, is multi-generational services. The strict silo divisions that say children over here, teens over there, adults over here, our program for seniors is back there. Those lines are blurring. Some of that is because the sophistication in technology is skewing younger. Some of that is because people my age still throw away the AARP mailers and don't want to be in the senior separation apartheid thing. And part of it is just, if you think of programming as story has this universal appeal. And I think the big trend that this is a piece of is to move from a philosophy of diversity, which identifies and separates all the different ingredients of your community, to inclusion, which also seeks ways not to homogenize and sanitize it, but to find things that are universal enough to include lots of people and to bring them together periodically. Right? So acknowledging the different needs of different segments is important, and seeking ways to blur those boundaries and let people engage without abandoning identity, but with seeing what the mix looks like, I think are also very important. And they're particularly important given the way the media is polarizing, and there are other polarizing influences in our lives today. And the library is one of the last great bastions of places where people come together. And when I talk with community groups, one of the things they value most highly is it's a good place to come and hang with people I don't really know and wouldn't otherwise come across. They don't go to my school, they don't go to my church, they don't live in my neighborhood, but we do have something in common. And part of what we have in common is our love of literature, or our interest in story, or our civic pride, or our need for a latte and a quiet place to read. But we want to be together at some level. Multi-generational programming is a very low threshold way and a very easy way to do that. This picture might be hard to parse depending on where you're sitting and what kind of glasses you have on today. This is the Cerritos Public Library in Southern California, and this is a multi-$1,000, multi-thousand-gallon saltwater aquarium that is built into this library. And on the left is the aquarium. It faces into the entrance of the library. It also faces into the children's area where this crowd is. If you look at this crowd, this is not just children. The bottom on the left side, that blue blob is Skip. He's the aquarist. That's a man in a wetsuit inside the tank with a microphone doing a program about reef fish, using the live fish around him as his visual aids. When Skip's not there, we have a fish cam that shows what's going on in the aquarium that you can access online or from any of the devices in the library. But the interest in the ocean stuff and the fact that he's a smart guy and a good presenter means that the children's room overflows with adults who are secretly, a lot of children's rooms you can't even come in without a kid, right? But this is programming of a sort that appeals to a lot of people. Storytelling of many kinds cuts across, music programs. There are lots of things that bring people together. I say that trend is one we ought to pursue, and for those of you in the public library, that means some really different changing about how you do programming if you traditionally say adult programming is planned here, children's here, teens here. Same thing in academic settings. To bring students and faculty together is unusual, but there are ways to do that, and the library is one of the few roofs that makes that happen. Again, another little shout out to Lexington. A lot of service is moving outdoors. A lot of service is moving outdoors. And I see a particular trend right now for people who want walk-in and walk-out programming. They want to come and go. Do you remember when, some of you are my age, you went to the movies as a kid? You just went in and you sat down and it was a continuous loop, and you'd stay till you say, oh, well, this is where we came in, and then you'd leave. That you didn't have to be there at a set time. You could just partake as convenient. That convenience factor is growing. And people are looking for drop-in, drop-out, spontaneous, oh, I'm here, call my friends, maybe they want to join me here. That is hard to do in a space like this one. It is very easy to do outdoors. I think that's what's behind some of the appeal of outdoor activities. And if a library has a nice outdoor space or wants to cultivate relationships that allow them to move some of their activities outdoors, you will reach a different part of the community. This is true on college campuses as it is in communities of any sort. The flexibility to come and go, to text your friends while you're there, to be out on a nice day, to talk to strangers. It's a little easier to talk to a stranger when you're milling around outside than when you're sitting like this. The least threatening position to be in, to talk to somebody you don't know, is standing beside them hip to hip, looking at something else. How many people have you talked to a parade, sporting event? You may have never turned around and look at them, but you still can have a conversation. That's something we want to exploit. So I'm talking about the human factors. Really, the relationship business is going to be as important as the content business moving forward. And developing, curating, maintaining the relationships is going to be a big part of our success. That means we need metrics for that. I'm looking at, again, when you have a captive audience, when you have a school or an academy, if you're in a university, you know who your clientele are in a very specific way. But if you're in a public library, it's a free choice. So not just recruitment, but retention of card holders. Do they renew? Tells us something. We ought to be looking at that. There are 4 big areas I think need focus, so we're going to do a good job on relationships. They're hospitality, independence, convenience, and what I'm calling generosity, which is sort of a way of thinking about what we do. The first area, hospitality, is less necessary to talk about in some states than others. In New Jersey, I spend a long time on this. And sometimes it's uphill work, you know what I'm saying? Here, not so much. I mean, it's different social expectations. But the idea that we're in the hospitality business means we can learn technique from the hospitality industry. It also means we can look at other providers than libraries and steal ideas, which is the way we have to do it because we don't have the money to invent them ourselves. One way to be hospitable is to make sure any service point you have is truly neutral and not your space. This is a perfect example in the Apple Store, in the Genius Bar. First of all, the desk is totally clear, except of what the people are working on with the clients at the time. There is no stuff on the desk that belongs to the Apple Store, ever. Look at your desks when you go back. How much of it says, this is mine, and this is mine, and this is mine, and this is mine. You're in my house, my stuff. And if you've ever worked a desk and somebody has come up and apologized for interrupting you, that's what they're talking about. They talk about invading your space. Because you've said, this is mine, this is my work area, this is my office, this is my desk. Who are you? I've made no space for you. There's no place for you to put your stuff down. It's mine, 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 mine. And way back in the lizard part of our brain, humans know that you don't come into someone else's territory without asking permission. Even when it says ask here, there's another deeper message that says, this is mine. So neutralize. You take all your stuff off the desk. Where are their work things? They're underneath. They're all there. You just can't see them. And they have more behind, right? If you need a giant pile of literature, put it on a literature rack 1 foot away to the side and leave a clean space. You will get more takers at the desk instantly. Right? Notice how they've set up the laptops. That is not accidental. It's not facing one or the other. They're looking at it together. Even though they have a counter between them, they're not necessarily on the same side of the counter, but they're set up to work on it as equals. You cannot tell from looking at this picture whose equipment that is. It's neutral. That's huge. And no matter how many ways you say, go ahead and interrupt me, the deeper message is not, I'm going into the zone here. Huh? Again, the easiest place to talk to somebody you don't know is standing up side by side, which is why pages get asked more questions than anybody. Shelvers get asked everything for 2 reasons. They're in the most approachable position based on human factors, and if your hand is on a book and you're putting it on there, there's some hope for the person's mind that you actually know where the books are. And there's a third thing I hear from younger people, which is accusing somebody of looking like a librarian might be an insult. And that way they don't have to guess who the staff are. Because if you're shelving books, you obviously work here. Right? They're asking the right person. And I do the kind of human factors work where I spy on people. I look through one-way glass, or I follow them around with stopwatches and lurk in the stacks and stuff like that. And it is absolutely clear that people look for people kind of like them before they ask a question, because they're hoping for somebody who'll cut them some slack. And the only exception is older men tend to ask younger women. Gee, I wonder why. But, they look for somebody they think is going to cut them a break, who's going to speak their language, who, if they have tattoos, they look for somebody with tattoos. I mean, they're looking for an acceptance, right? And part of what that says is if your staff don't look like your clientele, you're creating another kind of non-neutral barrier. Another way to show hospitality is to give people furniture that can be reconfigured, to say, we will let you make this space your own. Huge trend. This furniture was chosen by the students in this college, and in large part because it was reconfigurable. Now, I'll tell you, they've done something. They've got nothing but low tables. Have you ever tried to use a laptop on a low table for very long? It's hard on a person. So that's one thing about this picture I'm not so sure about. But the idea that they can make groups or reconfigure is huge. And if you let people move the furniture, don't put it back to where it was every night. Don't waste your time restoring it to the pristine symmetry and then have them drag it back again the next day. Just let it be where people want it and let them know they can rearrange it. Because the pages get asked so many questions, because the shelvers are the ones who are the first line of inquiry, make sure they know how to give a first response. If you work here, you are supposed to know where stuff is. And you can do that in a way that says, but I got to tell you, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I'd really like you to talk to one of our reference librarians if you have any more questions. And then, go walk by and say, psst, I got somebody in the 600s. You might want to swing by there in a minute and see how they're doing, and kind of tag team it. But to ask someone who works here how to use something that for all the world you've acted like the public could serve itself, and say, well, I don't know how to do that. It's like, excuse me, you work here, and you don't know how this goes, and you expect me to come in off the street and do it by myself? What is up with that? If a civilian is allowed to use it, then everybody in the staff should know how to do it well enough to show one of their buddies how it goes. Otherwise, it's not fit for public use. And if what we're talking about is a control freak thing that says, well, but that might turn into a reference question, then we have to figure that out with a team approach. And I'm not saying everybody's a reference librarian. I'm saying everybody should be able to handle the self-service stuff and make a decent referral and team with the other staff. Next trend, independence. There is an expectation out there in the world that people want to, and in some cases feel they should be able to use the library, and they're embarrassed about asking. Some exceptions. Some people just march right up and say, oh, I'm so glad, and they put themselves in your hands. God bless them. They are the minority. What we've got is people who want to be able to do some stuff for themselves, and they feel bad. They feel like a failure if they haven't done it. So we need the entry level to be so easy that they can be successful in their first endeavors. Again, the human factors data show that if they get a thing or two right on their own, they are more likely, in fact, more than twice as likely, to work with staff on a more advanced thing. So instead of, by making it easy, we lose the opportunity for staff engagement, by making the basic stuff so supportive of the users that they are initially successful, then they are empowered to say, well, I was doing this, but now that I want to go to the next step, I'd like to work with you. They are more likely to come to us than if they fail outright at the beginning. That means making things much more browsable. There is a need for known item searching, but there's also a huge need for browsing, especially in public libraries, though this also pertains in academic libraries. Surprisingly, they'll get one call number and then they'll go look at the stacks. And I got to tell you that for youth, it's even more important. And the idea of children's books arranged by author is just for the convenience of the children's librarians. I'm sorry, that's a bald-faced statement, but I got to tell you, if you put the princess books together, you're going to get more takers than if they have to know the author names of the princess books. That's just the way kids look stuff up. Okay? And I know they need to learn, and I know it's important, and I know when a parent's looking for one thing or you're trying to pull something for a program, it's a nuisance to go through a bin of princess books. Even so. The best public library information neighborhoods, I think, that I'm seeing lately are at Topeka, Shawnee County. This is actually an older generation. This is one they haven't redone. They've changed their signage so that every neighborhood now shows real people doing the activity that's represented in the neighborhood. So they show health information, and they have pictures then of healthy lifestyle and medical consultation and some other things. They show images of community people actually doing the stuff that's in that area, and that's attracting people. Okay. In the gardening section, there's a really wonderful picture of a grandparent and a grandchild gardening together. It's like, I don't know if I want those books, but I want that life, and it pulls people towards it. Okay. Another thing you can do to make things hospitable, easy to use, is to have action-based signs. Tell people what they do here, not what it's called. One of my clients is a library in California, and I won't tell you their name, but their zip code is 90210, which means they can buy any signs they want. And when I first started working with them, one of the biggest signs you saw when you walked in the library said, microforms. Kids, get in the van. We're going to go get microforms today. What was that? Who needs to know that word? It was where their back issues of the local newspaper and some other stuff. You know, you could at least tell what was in there. But I mean, this had nothing to do with real life. If people pay for stuff in your library, if they pay fines or whatever, then the sign where they pay should have the word P-A-Y on it, like at the parking lot. If I took any one of you, bunch of you, blindfolded you now, hustled you out, drove over to the airport, flew you to a country where you didn't know the language or the alphabet, took you to a big complex building that you'd never seen before, spun you around 3 times to make you dizzy, and whipped off the blindfold and said, take me to Cirque. You could do it. Because you know what you're looking at. You don't need a sign. You know what it looks like. You know what happens there. You know how it goes. You could probably figure out the interface even without reading the language. Because you know that stuff. So we don't need to call something circulation for us. And we certainly don't need to call it that for civilians. Right? Signs to say, here's what you do here. Oh, not what we do, what you do here. Help people be empowered to know what's going on. It's also useful to them to know wherever they do look, that they're going to find an interface that actually has some basis in their own reality. If you offer any kind of video, do your best to offer it an interface they already understand. If you're going to, so many, well, this is not how you use informational content in the whole rest of your life, but when you're in the library, here's what you have to do. That's getting really old. There are a lot of people with a lot of money figuring out how interfaces should look, and we ought to be taking advantage of that to the extent we can. My husband, I coerced my husband many years ago into buying his black tie, his tuxedo. And now I coerce him into wearing it on various occasions and events. But they're not frequent enough. He always has to say some bad words when he's tying his bow tie, until we met this guy on YouTube, who is funny and charming, and he gives great instructions, and he shows you just what to do. So we put the laptop on the dresser, and my husband could do it now, right? If he had to learn an interface before that, I would never get him into that suit, okay? The threshold has to be low for people to consume. What I think in the library world we think is if we lower the threshold, we're dumbing down. We aren't. We're just getting people's foot on a ladder that leads to a whole lot of places we want to help them go. Last one on this list is the idea that now when you look things up, you look them up by subject. For many of the reasons people are seeking content, it's not a subject they're interested in, it's their own situation. And there are plenty of people who go into those situations so that you don't know when they'll go, but you know that there are people around you who will go. All right? So sooner or later, there are going to be people expecting their first child. Sooner or later, there are going to be students, preparing for midterms. Sooner or later, there's going to be somebody arranging care for elder parents. And if you arranged your content according to those life situations and pulled it together, not by what the topic is, but if you're in this pickle, click here. you would, again, make a lot of people connect to what you offer in a much more visible and ready way, particularly if you're trying to reach them online where there's nobody standing there to do the reference work for them. I had an identity theft some years ago. It's quite a while ago now. I was in the hospital and somebody must have gotten into my hospital records while I was there and got a cell phone and used it to call prison a lot. And in the process of sorting this mess out, I went to the library's files and what do I do? And I'm searching for information. Do you know what the Library of Congress subject heading for identity theft is? It's not identity theft. It's false personation. Because that is a legal term, and that is the type of law that these violations fit under, and Library of Congress uses that guideline of how you talk about various crimes. Now, I even knew that part about, but I didn't know what the crime was called in law, and so it took me a while to get there, and I'm a librarian. Okay? Topic-based, subject-based is not always the way in. I knew my situation. And situations have nuances. If you just got a diagnosis of cancer, you need a different kind of information than if you want to know what to do when your family member got a diagnosis of cancer. It's not all just cancer. So sometimes the situation gives a nuanced read on what is a general topic. If you replaced your existing pathfinders and bibliographies that are topically oriented with similar products based on your expertise of pulling content together, similar products that were situationally oriented, you would see their use go up substantially. And you know what those questions are. People present themselves. My kid won't read. What do I do? That situation people can relate to. Here's our response to that. You also, I think, are doing well long-term if you support convenience. When you go home today, if you need to stop for milk and bread on the way home, are you going to go to the finest dairy and the finest bakery you know about? Or are you going to go someplace where you don't have to make a left turn? It is not your ignorance of quality that makes you choose convenience. It is your life on this planet and all the other stuff you have to do. So the challenge for us moving forward is to make our quality convenient, knowing that people who know there are better and higher quality ways to do it will still pick the convenient way because of lifestyle pressures. It's not ignorance that makes people choose the easy way. It's other stuff, and we need to acknowledge that human factor. We need to have hours that actually match real people's hours. No fooling. We have to be open when it's convenient for them to stop in. Not just because they'll come whenever we're open because we're better quality. It doesn't work that way. The library is on the way to something else, and we need to blend with that. I talked about spontaneous, walk in, walk out programming before, that people are spontaneous. I also think devoting some of our programming time to, well, it looks like we have a critical mass worth of folks in this part of the library. Maybe let's do a 15-minute program. Instead of having to have the flyers and set it up and bring in somebody from outside and, to just say, this looks like an opportunity. Anybody interested in seeing how this cool app works? I'm showing it over here on aisle 2, let's do it. And making our expertise available, showing a sample of our wares, basically, without all the hurrah about making their convenient. Has anybody here currently or recently wrangled a toddler to go somewhere? Hitting a time certain for a start time is just really hard and a pain. But if you happen to be at the library with your toddler and some smart library person looked around and said, I got 4 moms and 6 toddlers right here, let's go for it. Get in a circle, we'll do 10 minutes. Now you're talking about my life, right? I think convenience is not the opposite of quality. It's a serendipitous moment at which it's easy to get something done that might otherwise have a high threshold. And it's all about lowering the threshold but not lowering the quality. Lending things that people want to borrow or don't, there are people lending tools, toys, seeds. I don't know if they get the seeds back. if I'm here to borrow one thing, are there other things I can borrow? That's a convenience. And the last one, a little bit controversial. I've got some clients now who are starting to offer choices of borrowing plans. Okay, if you have a limit of 50 books and people are going to have them for 2 weeks, would you be willing to loan 2 books for 50 weeks? It's the same amount of resource. Are there different ways to use the library, different cards to sign up for that have equivalent financial value but match people's lifestyle better? Some heavy video borrowers maybe want a different service plan. They're used to this now. They sign up on Netflix. They kind of specify what's right for them. Your automated system could support this tomorrow with a separate patron category. You could offer people who always wanted the same due date. Could you always make it on a Thursday? Because Thursday's when I come downtown. Okay, your computers could manage this without batting an eye. You just sign somebody up for the Thursday card, and you're off and running. But we haven't gone there. We've said one size fits all, because in the past, that's what worked for us because of workload factors. Those workload factors have been eliminated by our automated systems, but we haven't exploited any of that. Now, academic libraries have different patron categories for faculty and staff and graduate students and all of that. They're all built into the systems we already own. We just haven't thought of them from a patron perspective. And finally, I want to talk about generosity. For me, that's kind of the walk in somebody else's shoes aspect of library service that I think we are in our hearts meant to do, but we haven't thought of as a growth area for our planning. Cardholder recognition. We have gone so far towards confidentiality, we have turned it into anonymity. When in fact, people want to be recognized. They want to join the library. They don't want us to be announcing what they're reading to other people, but this is a card from a library in the UK that actually says that if you're a frequent user, you get some recognition. And every so often, they have a small rental fee on their video collection, so if you rent 6, you get a free one. Right? They're actually noticing Pierce County, Tacoma, Washington. Now, if you are a friend or a donor to the library, it says honored donor right on your card. It notices that you've got a relationship. We don't have to be anonymous to be confidential. We do have to presume innocence, however. Who's worked Cirque? After a while, you develop a healthy cynicism. You know what I'm saying? And that's, if you work with a lot of people, you can build that up. But not everybody's a crook, guys. And I took my car into the shop a while ago, and I noticed when I was explaining to the man what was wrong, I had an intermittent electrical problem. Sometimes it happened and sometimes it didn't. And I'm telling this to the guy, and I can watch him writing upside down, and he says, customer claims that. What the? Claim? I'm not claiming. I'm telling you, dude, this is what's happening. And then I thought, oh my goodness, claims returned. Alleges, but we know better. We have a code in our system that says, right? Oh, don't give me that. Yeah, right? Reports returned is in fact what that code should say. But our skepticism is built in, and that's built in because of experiences we've had that we have accumulated. But with our borrowers, they expect to be treated. If we can't show that they messed with us, then they should really be treated like they didn't. Now, I'm not a chump. You put it in their record, and 2 or 3 reports returns, and then we have to talk, okay? Even so, if you find yourself using words like claims, if you find yourself using words like allow, you're on the side of a trust barrier there that I think we need to think about. And the presumption of innocence that says innocent until proven guilty, it works in the whole rest of our society except for the circ desk and maybe traffic court. there's something in this culturally that we need to attend to. We also need to understand that exceptions really are just exceptions. And the vivid anecdotes of our life stick with us, and they start to weight our decision-making, even when they are rare occurrences. All the things that didn't cause us trouble and didn't take a lot of our time go in the wayside, and we remember the real killers that made us tear our hair out. And we start to design our services to the exceptions. We start to try to develop systems that will work no matter what, and frequently that means locking them down, making them less accessible, or freezing them somehow. And I know I'm running long, but I'm gonna say just one story about my mama, because I made it all the way through this without talking about her. I have a 92-year-old mother who has lived in California for nearly more than 60 years now. But she grew up in Brooklyn, and I gotta tell you, you don't take that out of a girl. She is still from Brooklyn. This is an old lady with an attitude. And she lives in what is now the Silicon Valley. It wasn't when we growing up there, but that's where she lives. And her local public library has gone to a very high-tech, automated, appropriate for the community style of service, including 100% self-check. Mrs. Frye is not what you call an early adopter of technology, okay? And the joke in the family is that her preference is for voice-activated technology, which means she tells somebody younger to do it. She wasn't interested in Skype at all until she realized she could see great-grandkids with that. But she still makes my brother go over and set it up for her every Sunday because she's not going to learn it. So she's not going to use self-check. Now, this library could look at the Mrs. Fryes in their neighborhood, and she's a steady user and a good donor and everything else, and say, well, we can't get rid of regular circ because look at poor old Mrs. Frye, who will cause a scene if we cross her. But what they've done is they've gone to self-check, but when they see her coming, and they always do, somebody walks over to her, greets her by name, takes the stuff out of her hands, and walks through and does it for her. And they treat her like the exception she is. Half the time they walk her out to her car. That is treating an exception like an exception. And by the way, that is change with mercy. They have not said we have to be the lowest common denominator because we've still got some people who are not going to catch up for whatever reason. We're going to go to where everybody will be to be current, and we'll make sure we don't leave those people stranded. We will bring them along. We will make sure they're still successful, but we'll spend 15% of our time on that instead of 100% of our time doing it the old way. And I think in library sense, nothing all arrives on one day and you throw it all out and you put the new one in. That's not how it is. You've got a shift in emphasis. And the real movement toward the future is to find a way to shift your emphasis with mercy and reallocate the amount of time you're spending on the old stuff and the amount of time you're willing to devote to the new stuff. Instead of waiting till the new stuff is mainstream for 100% of the population, you start 15% of your effort when 15% of the people are ready. And you follow the curve around. I'd like to say it's as simple as wave a wand and it all changes tomorrow. In fact, it's evolutionary. The evolution goes fairly quickly. I would suggest to you that regardless of what techniques we use, regardless of what type of library we are, regardless of what we're doing to do what we do, this is the business we're in. We're in the business of helping people take content and turn it into meaning, and of doing that in community. And that's good for you. It enlightens you, it connects you, it gives you a lift, it makes you less likely to go out and kill other people, at least for the next 15, 20 minutes. And that if you want to take the really big view, even when we're using bacteria for storage, this will be the business we're in. Helping people turn content into meaning, wisdom, in a way that applies to the way they actually live their life, the way they actually connect to other people, the actual way they feel about being in the universe today. And that is an exceptionally non-trivial business to be in. And no technique puts it out of business. People will be needing this. People will be hungering for this as long as there are people. And if we can keep our eye on that transaction and that transformation that you just described to each other, then if we have that as a goal, then it's hard to make too many mistakes. You may try stuff that doesn't work great. You may do something and invest in it and it get replaced by another technique. If you keep your eye on this, you'll be in the right business and you will be relevant and you will have meaning and it will always be work worth doing. Okay? So you are now futurists. Keep your eye on what's important. And if you want to debate, ask questions, or otherwise continue this conversation beyond the little bit of time we had today, this is how to find me. Thank you so much for your patience and your participation.